Hey, I'm going to start off with Vaughn. We're going to be talking, try to pay as much attention we can in the last national elections. And I'm having a senior moment.
All right.
We want to talk a little bit also about the war that is being proposed. So listen up. Vaughn, why don't you start it off
Okay.
with it?
On or about November 11th, following the November elections, the New York Times published a letter from noted writer Jane Smiley. And in that letter, Jane Smiley said the following: "The Republican Party now gets to create the world it has been saying for a generation that it wants. The Republican world looks to many of us like a Hobbesian jungle. Inch of America will be up for grabs, where there's no sense of common property, common heritage, or common good, where the only American ethic will be greed. The voters have indicated that this is the world they want, and the liberals have been told to shut up. After the 2000 election, when it looked as if this world was going to be imposed upon the country in spite of the popular will, I was upset and outraged. But this time, when the voters seem to have freely chosen it, or chosen not to care, I'm rather glad. If this is the world they want, this is the world they deserve. At least there's clarity in that, and guess what? They can't say they weren't warned."
I agree with that.
And as a postscript, let me just say, recently House Republicans refused to extend federal unemployment insurance. Their inaction means that later this month, sometime before the Christmas holiday, more than 800,000 unemployed Americans will receive letters telling them that their unemployment benefits have been cut off. Merry Christmas from the GOP.
Why? And we've been having this conversation most of the afternoon, but I think we need to share our feelings with the public. Um, Working class white Americans and a very small few of minority Americans voted Republican in this last election. Working class, middle class Americans voted for these people, knowing their record, knowing what they were about, and yet they voted overwhelmingly for this government. Why?
Or didn't vote at all, which is another
Right.
factor.
Okay. That's a good point, Larry. But the people who voted, a large number of them, working class
Absolutely.
and middle class and middle income, because we needed, when we say middle class in America, we need to specify what middle class we're talking about. Don't you think so, Vaughn?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And you know what my contention, I mean, you two know what I mean, what I'm famous for. I always think the race card is in everything that white America does, whether it's working class.
Well, you're not by yourself in that,
Yeah.
because I think the same thing. And
I think the Democratic
I think
Party.
Vaughn does too. I don't think it's that simple, but I think that's in there.
Well, it's a mix of things. I
Sure.
think that was one element.
So do I.
But there was also the stealth campaign that was conducted by the Republican Party. It was a war of distraction, the marketing of the prospect of the war with Iraq, and the notion that anybody who wasn't willing to support it was unpatriotic, was a traitor. And I think the marketing of this war was a distraction that took attention away from a collapsing economy, a failed education system, a healthcare crisis, the raids on Social Security, and a new federal budget deficit of $157 billion. This was a distraction. It was diversionary.
And the rape of the environment.
And the rape of the environment.
I think all those true, Vaughn, and I still think when it gets down to that undecided vote, that final issue for them is the Democratic Party, for a large number of people, is too brown and too black. And in their mind, that's what they see. I mean, it couldn't have helped the Democrats, and I mean, One of the people that I didn't see getting beat was Max Cleland. Now here they're talking war talk. Here's a guy who's an actual, not that I've ever held war up to anything, who is a veteran, wounded more than once, rewarded, and he was termed as unpatriotic by a guy. If he had to fight his way around the corner, he would know what to do. That's the other thing that gets me. I mean, where's this headed, Vaughn? I mean, where's this country headed? Larry, where are we headed? I'm frustrated by it.
I'm terribly frustrated. I can't recall being this depressed as I was, first of all, when Bush got elected, if you call it an election. But whatever. But then secondly, in the very recent one that we're talking about, I mean, this incredible swing toward the Republican majority and so forth. It's so depressing, it's not even funny. And I am tempted to feel exactly as this woman that you're quoting feels. And I do feel that way. The problem with it is that all of us are going to pay this price. It's not just the people who, in fact, voted and will get what they deserve, but there's a number of people who don't support this and who will also get what we don't deserve. And so I have to worry about my granddaughter and your granddaughter and so forth, because they're going to inherit this thing that we have, in a sense, given up. And that's what really worries me.
You don't think the Patriot Act is going to keep us safe?
Well, I've done a fair amount of research on the USA Patriot Act of 2001.
That in itself is frightening.
And attended hearings in Washington last summer. And just a bit of background on the USA Patriot Act. This was a draconian, sweeping bill that was rushed through Congress only 6 weeks after 9/11, with no public hearings, no opportunity for public input, and in the wake of a number of closed-door meetings in Washington. It was enabled by the Republican administration, which insisted this had to be enacted into law, and by a number of politicians who signed on so that they could take the bows and say, okay, folks back in Peoria, look at what we've done. We're taking steps to protect the American people. When you read the law, it's awfully hard to see where these protections are going to come from. What it does do is encourage domestic espionage in a way that we haven't seen since COINTELPRO back in the 60s.
Well, you know what concerns me, and also the other thing is that I've been listening with interest, is some people that I've really considered both conservative and liberal, who see themselves as constitutional law being their forte, whether it be from a conservative side, have all been almost unanimous in agreement this is a dangerous law.
Well, all you have to do is go on the internet and take a look at all of the analyses from the think tanks, from the Hoover Institution and the American Heritage Foundation, American Enterprise Institute, right across the spectrum to the Democratic Leadership Forum on the left. They are unanimous in their contempt.
Some of the most conservative think tanks have come out against it.
That's right. And when you see this level of unanimity among groups with very different agendas across a very broad spectrum, it should tell you that something has gone violently wrong with the legislative process. This bill has in large part not been tested in the courts, but I have no doubt that when it is, large portions of it will be struck down as unconstitutional on their face. But
you have more faith than I have.
You have more faith than I do, too.
You have more faith than I have.
Because
Not that it shouldn't be.
I see the Supreme Court as just another arm of the Bush government. I mean, I just see them totally, I mean, they're the ones responsible for this man being president in the first
You only
place.
have to look back to that election and their stand in the whole Florida business to know that you can no longer count on the Supreme Court.
I have no faith in this court.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm worried
agree.
right now, as all of us should be, about this affirmative action case that is coming before the Supreme Court. You can predict the outcome.
I'm at,
Sure.
see, but I'm not so sure. See, I think I'm almost like James Smiley. I'm gonna sit back and smile about this because
Oh, I wish I
there are
could,
some
John.
folks that have taken this, that America's changing, everything's better. Well, it ain't better.
It ain't better. You're right.
And I'm sick and tired of that kumbaya attitude that exists. And let me tell you something, the few changes that occur, and there are a number of prominent people who didn't have the kind of jobs that they have today, and especially in this state and especially nationally, all over TV. White women in particular have benefited the most from the civil rights actions of the 1960s.
Well, you know, you mentioned a little while ago that race is the most important variable in this whole
It
thing.
still is.
And I think it still is too. And the example, the prime example to me is that whole business of the affirmative action in the university system in California.
Of course.
Okay? When affirmative action got shot down there, the swing group
Were white women.
were white women who in fact benefited more from affirmative action than any other group in existence, okay? Now, how in the world could these people have voted against the very thing which had given them so much promise? Because of race. The way that whole thing was packaged, it looked like the benefactors of this whole business were black
It's
people
always
who
been
in
about
fact
race.
are non-deserving by definition.
It has always been about race.
Of
to
course
me.
it is. It has
I mean,
been, and it is now.
One of the prime examples that I get, I crack up laughing now, is I don't even watch. I've watched very few sporting events anymore. I mean, I crack up now because it is like, why do I want to watch? I watch all these brothers playing these games and everything, and then I see and then I see white women down there getting jobs, interviewing them. Okay, I mean, you know, it's like, okay, you walked on my back, now you're going to spit in my face. And unfortunately, that portion of white women in America haven't come forward, that have remained silent around these issues. Look at the Tiger Woods situation as a perfect example of the worst kind of racism that I've seen exhibited. When did Tiger Woods become responsible for, I know he made the mistake of making that commercial, and this is why I'm talking about race, Vaughn, and an election. Because when you really attack it and take a look at it for what it really means, here's a young man comes into this thing, he makes one of his first commercials he made, my name is Tiger Woods, and I blah, blah, won so many amateur championships, yet there are 1,348 clubs that I can't join.
Right.
When did we as a people become responsible for white women getting the clubs when this tour has been a white male dominated thing? We couldn't even play in the tournament ourselves and kept us out, and now goes and makes him the target of, and he's asked, how come Phil Mickelson wasn't asked? How come Jack Nicklaus wasn't asked?
Right.
How come Arnold Palmer, Ben Hogan? You know, I mean, and this is the extent of the racism in America now, and this is why I still think underneath it all, money doesn't matter. They'd rather die poor, that they'd rather do without those checks, Vaughn, a large amount of them, than see this party get in representing all them other people. And you hear those magic words.
Those people.
Those people. Those,
Well, if you're wrong about this, and if we are wrong about this, then somebody has to explain to me how in the world people, seeing what's happening to the economy, seeing what's happening to the environment, all those things that you mentioned, still vote for this particular party.
Well, I'm going to take a higher-minded view of that.
Okay.
My sense is that many of those people had no idea what they were voting for. They were told that they were voting for the protection and security and well-being of America. They were voting for patriotism. and many of them bought
Okay.
into that.
I will not argue.
No, but let me finish.
No, we're not going to argue.
No,
that.
we're not going to argue that.
That's
point.
a stealth
You might as well
campaign.
lead us right on into the war thing.
Of course,
We can deal with that shortly. But, you know, there was a stealth campaign that was run. The Sunny Mask and the homespun platitudes that were sold by the Republicans to these people conceal a reality that's far more extreme than these people realize. And I don't think they understood exactly what they were voting for.
I think-
Saddam Hussein became a surrogate for Osama bin Laden. And that was what was packaged and slickly marketed and sold to the electorate. And I think they bought into that. My sense is that it was a diversion. You know, America is a place where critical thinking is really in short supply. And you talk to a lot of people on the street, you know, interviews with the man on the street, and you realize, my God, you know, these people have no clue. And I think, you know, and I say this with tongue in cheek, one of the greatest failings of democracy is that everybody has a vote. But I'll pass it over to you guys.
Who assisted
No.
them in the selling of this, Vaughn?
Well, the media, of course, assisted, but then the Democrats did their share. The Democrats
course.
helped them.
And that's my point.
They
Just to
allowed
blame-
themselves to get boxed in.
Just to blame that little man on the street is not enough for
We
me.
started out saying this was a much more complex issue,
Right.
okay?
It is.
And the Democrats, quite frankly, had very little to offer. I mean,
The only part of the Democratic Party I heard from that was consistent in their thing, because I watched the hearings in Washington a lot. You can get them on C-SPAN, and especially the House, where the black Democrat,
Yes.
the black caucus stood up against this war machine from the beginning to the end
Yes.
and never wavered in that. Never. And a few scattered other Democrats throughout the House.
Well, I certainly
But a
became
large number of
disenchanted
them,
with the
and
Democratic
Senate
Party
caved-
as a whole.
Yeah, the Senate caved
Oh.
in completely,
Oh,
Yeah, they-
cave.
except for the one guy down there in West Virginia,
And Paul Wellstone.
Yeah.
and Paul
And
Wellstone,
Paul Wellstone.
who was considered, as you put it, what did they call him? He worked for who?
Oh, his Republican opponent, Norm Coleman, had painted him practically as an operative of Al-Qaeda.
Okay. That kind of stupidity, that kind of smallness of mind,
And don't forget our Vermont reps.
I
They
was,
stood
I was
up
about to
against
say,
it.
we have to say something
Our
about
three,
Vermont.
our three representatives in Congress
All
stood
three.
very tall.
All
All
three.
Shoulder to shoulder.
well, I'm happy for them.
That's right. No, you
Well-
got to give it up to them, John. Come on. You got to give it up.
Look, they're not my heroes.
I understand that.
but
They don't-
I'm happy
we're
to
not-
have
We're
them.
not talking about that.
I give them
Believe
credit
me.
on
We're
that. They
talking
stood up
about
for
a
that.
principal stand
Yeah.
in
But the Democratic Party as a group, I'm terribly disenchanted
Yeah.
with them.
Well, what's the choice?
Well, but there is none. And that's why, that's another reason why a lot of people didn't vote. I mean, what's the point?
Well,
But it is a complex issue.
It's a total-
And everything that you said, I think, is absolutely valid.
and I think Vaughn is right. I mean, the circumspect of the whole thing. But look,
It's almost a throwback to McCarthyism. The
no,
way
no,
that
you don't have to go back to
the
McCarthyism.
patriotism label or traitor label.
Who
was
did
thrown
Reagan
around.
label in the 80s?
Right,
The evil empire.
Evil
right,
empire, correct.
right.
Okay? They have been selling this concept. They need, once communism went away, they needed to find somebody else to make the bad fall guy. Because for the last 50 years, back to McCarthyism, which is the Reaganism thing too, was the evil empire, McCarthyism, all that's connected. They always had to have somebody to hate.
Well, the sad thing is it works, John.
Yeah, it does
It
work.
works. I mean, it should
What did
work.
you expect where a country
Well-
whose heritage is about, did
It's not what I expected. I guess I was hoping for more, okay?
well, my man.
I was hoping for more.
See, I
really-
look at it from the battered woman viewpoint.
Yeah, I know.
What's that, John?
The
Yeah.
battered woman viewpoint, the
Yeah,
guy always
I know.
comes back and say, I loved you, baby.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to beat up on you. Well,
Yeah,
they've
I
been beating
know.
up on us for 400 years, and I don't believe them. And that's
No.
a radical viewpoint.
No, I don't either, John, but I was hoping that a larger number of us wouldn't believe them.
I can't.
And Obviously I'm wrong. I'm not
You
arguing
know,
the
yeah,
point.
no, you're right, and
arguing the point.
sadness of that whole business is, and this whole business is, and this is what saddens me, is white working class America that I watch struggle around me as I live in some place like the old North End, and I wonder how many of them really moved to the other side and voted. I mean, really, I mean, I know that y'all
You
like
know-
to sell this place as the most progressive place in America. Well, it ain't the most progressive place in America.
No. Neither one of us tries to sell Vermont as the most progressive place in America. But it does have some features which I think make life better
And I think-
than I would have it
and
in
I
any
think
place
that-
else that I know in the United States.
Well,
that doesn't make
I don't buy that
make
it's
it
better
this
than any other
utopia.
place in the United States.
No, I didn't say that.
No,
I
for-
said that
it's
it
better
has
for-
some features,
Right.
right?
It has
which,
features.
which make my life, at least, and the life of my family here, better than it would be in other places.
Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't make it a utopia, and
right.
you know, John,
Yeah.
you know where I'm coming from. I argue every day about the deficiencies of this state, in particular the education system.
But the quality of
But
life
the quality of life,
is,
I like.
I don't
and-
know.
And there's no place in the United
lived
States
in-
that I
I
would
lived-
rather live, and
I lived in other
and I say
places
that.
most of my adult life, and my
So
quality
have
of
I.
life was fine.
Okay,
you know? Okay.
all right, fine. I have no, listen,
Well, you know what they
And
say,
it fit
John?
my needs.
Well, you know what they say, John? People vote with their feet.
No, that's
no,
okay.
that's mean. That's mean, and I will not let you get away with that.
I don't, it's all right. He's been living here more than
teasing.
5 years.
I'm just
so,
teasing.
you
All
know,
right, come on.
I'm not gonna let you get away with
I'm
that.
gonna crack up.
That was
because,
mean.
because the fact of the matter is, and we're not, and see, here's the other thing is, and I'm including Vermont as part of the 50 states. See, and collectively, a lot of that thinking that operated in the other states, I don't care which way they voted as an individual, but there's a collective issue. The United States is this country,
Yeah, I know.
okay? And one group in this country has decided that the country is their responsibility and their responsibility alone, and that they have the right to wipe out whoever they want to wipe out, because I think we're headed down the path that historically has happened to most democracies in the history of the world. They end up being what?
You tell me.
Autocratic.
Plutocracies.
That's right.
Okay.
And I think we're headed in that direction. Just faster than a lot of others because we gain so much power so much quickly because of the age of technology.
And because of the massive resources.
That's right.
Well,
And no other country has ever had the resources we've had within our borders.
I think we're going to learn a lot. And I think the next 2 to 4 years is going to be one great big lesson. And I just hope we learn something from
Well, I
it.
think Vaughn has hit a lot of
We
nails
learned
on the head for
something
me
from it.
and opened up a lot of doors. And I hope that people who see this show understand that don't look at these three brown faces and don't think that we're not concerned about the complexity of the society as a whole and that we're only talking about brown faces. We're talking about faces, American faces, that is trapped as we see it in our own mind, in our educations, our collective educations, we're on the same path. Somewhere there's some danger involved when we're able to take substance out of debate and interject innuendo and hatred and all those other things, and that decides who leads us.
And it's so large, you see, because the media has been bought off. It's very, very difficult to find anything in the media which will stand against any
We
of
may
this.
be talking to the last of the free
Well,
speech part in
that's what I'm
America right
saying.
now on
That's what I'm
Access
saying.
TV because
I mean,
when you turn on Fox and CBS and ABC,
all the same
if
message.
you shut your eyes and listen,
All the same
you don't
message.
have to,
The same message, and nobody is criticized.
Right. Now, what's interesting about this country, we gained the power in this country, took this land by what? By force. Ain't nothing changed. We still doing it. Now we just moved outside of our borders.
Well, let's segue into the proposed war with Iraq. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Oh, let's talk about the war in Iraq, Vaughn. First of all, I just want one figure you to give me. What's the estimate of troops of color in an American?
Around 30%.
Thank you. That's all I want to know. Then you can go on. I want that point made.
Well, I think that if you look at this proposed war and you analyze it for what it really is, it flies in the face of a number of things that the Republican Party claims that it stands for. We want less government. Well, it just created a massive bureaucracy for the Department of Homeland Security, which will probably be as unwieldy a federal bureaucracy as we've ever seen.
What's the estimates for them to be up and running?
Oh my gosh, I couldn't tell you.
Somewhere between 4 to 10 years.
Well, if that. You know, it's going to be something that's constantly evolving. You know, and then we want to get government out of people's private lives. So we get the USA Patriot Act of 2001, which is John Ashcroft's dream. You know, wiretaps without court approval, you know, domestic espionage.
What library books are you
Preventive
taking?
detention.
Oh yeah, that one cracked me up. The
What
library.
library
exactly.
books do you get?
That's right.
What library
What
books? What kind
email
of
do you-
emails? What
Exactly.
emails
Oh,
do you
Right,
read?
exactly.
God, and they talk about saving a democracy?
Yeah.
Please.
You mean
Yeah.
that's going to interfere with my trip to Orlando, man? I got my agreement, man.
Yeah.
I got to go to the Bahamas.
But it's frightening when you analyze it and pull it apart. And I think that the events of 9/11 were shamelessly exploited in a number of campaigns in November with the issue of security and patriotism and so forth. Those weren't the real issues at all, but it was what was packaged, marketed, and sold. I think that any action in Iraq really has a subtext.
Which is?
A naked grab for natural resources. And what's going to happen if that action is undertaken is that those oil fields will be seized. The British and the Americans will take all of the lucrative drilling and refining contracts and cut out the greedy French and the Russians. And we'll have and we will have cheap oil
And it's
for
the
as long
first,
as it flows.
and it's the first step in that direction.
Yeah, that's right. We'll
Because
have-
that's just the first step. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that the ultimate goal is.
You all think this is the first step? We've been doing this for 60 years in that
No, I mean the first step.
country.
The first step
Or longer.
in gaining complete control of all those oil reserves.
Yeah.
Because Britain lost control of it in
Yeah.
the Second World
Right.
War.
And the end game is to undercut
Right.
OPEC. Once that's done, once Iraq is secured, then OPEC can be undercut, and cheap oil will flow for as long as it exists. I think that's the subtext, that's the verso of much of this talk about war with Iraq. What people do not look at, what they don't understand, is the very steep, long downside. If we embark on that path, no American anywhere in this world
Is
or
safe.
in the United States will be safe.
That's right. Which is ironic, since since we're being told that this is a step towards security.
Yeah.
But this is what.
There is.
But this is the same ball game that you were in 300 years ago when we were annexing the West. Nothing has changed. You think about the headset under this thing, this thing we call democracy, that same headset. We couldn't do it any other way. We didn't convince them. So now let's just do it. Let's just take it. That's what they were talking about, Larry.
No, I know that. No,
Yeah.
no, I understand that.
We are, and
But-
this is the other thing that we don't want to talk about in this country. We are, without a doubt, a violent society because they have sold the other side as being violent. We are as prone to violence as they are.
Oh, and that's been shown over and over
And
and
over
over
again.
again. And there are so many examples that's not even funny. No, that's not what believe me, I believe exactly what you just said. What Vaughn is saying is that
Vaughn's taking it
that
deeper
if you
than what
look
I'm
out,
saying.
that if you look out into the future, that there won't be a safe place in this country.
There's not now.
That's right.
No, I know, but it'll be much worse.
It'll be much worse.
Much worse.
It'll increase
That-
the reaction.
listen.
I mean, I agree with Vaughn 100% because Americans
And there's-
really, in large parts of the world, they don't. If they could do without your little dollar or whatever to get their economies going, they would do without them altogether.
Absolutely.
Really.
Absolutely. And believe me, and we're just gonna ratchet up the hatred.
Yeah.
We're gonna ratchet up all kinds of things in this country.
And it's not-
And there's no way you can, there's nothing this country can do if it proceeds down this road. There's nothing this country can do to protect itself
That's true.
inside.
Unless, of course, you turn it into a police state.
Well, I think that we're
Even
headed
that
in that
won't do it.
direction.
Even that
I
won't
think-
do it.
No, I know. I don't think
Israel
that
is
we're
a
headed in
police
that
state,
direction.
And look what's happening
We're
there.
already a police state.
Of course.
And it's very interesting. I was reading an article that a guy named Tim Wise wrote a couple of years ago about the school shootings
Yes.
and how they refused to put a thing on there.
Yes.
And one of the things that he said in there, again, took note. Communities of color in this country have always lived in a semi-police state.
Of course.
And that's going ignored. And remember what he was talking about, the school shooting,
Of
the
course.
violence that was ignored?
Of course.
Well, guess what? They got away with it in our communities, the police brutality, the profiling and all that, and now they've moved it. It's everybody.
I know, it's another one of those things
And
we're saying,
it's
that
another
we're
one of those
going to
things.
get what we deserve.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's sad.
Yeah.
Because we let it go.
I know.
Well, you know, one of the problems, of course, is that I don't think enough people learned the lesson of 9/11, which is simply that it's no longer Pax Americana, we're safe and sound, tucked between two massive oceans. We can be hit at home. We can be hit where we live. We can be hit in ways that can destroy the morale of a nation. They can hit us where we live. And I think to ignore that, or to gloss over it, or to try to minimize it, is to embark on a fool's errand. We can never go back to the way things were before 9/11.
I don't think so. And what I'm concerned about, I think even further when you say that, I think that all the other issues that destroy us internally will become even uglier if we get hit again and we get hit again and again, because those among us that are seen among the weakest in this thing will be the ones who will be attacked the most. Because we live in a society where it is traditionally the strong has eaten its weak. And consequently, and this is what I'm going to say, and I'm going to lay it out there, over the next 10 to 20 years, these 6% black Republicans, that's about that, 6 or 7, I'm concerned about them because they're going to find out the real truth about who it is that they're doing business with, because they're going to start eating us up. I mean, if they think that the statistics are terrible now, statistics are going to become even worse. If there's perception of, if we say the wrong thing, 5 years from now, we'll be in jail. We may not be able to have this conversation 5 years from now.
Well, I'd like to take...
And not be labeled.
I'm
No,
going to take a less cynical view. I would think that the American people would not stand for anything like that. They wouldn't allow themselves to be forced into that kind of way of life. We live in a free society with open borders. You know, the only way that you can fully protect this country is to seal the borders and turn this place into a police state, like Saudi Arabia, where I spent so much time back in the 80s.
I don't think that I'll see it in my lifetime, but I think it's coming. I just think George Orwell was a century late. I think Big Brother is well on his way. I think George Orwell hit the nail on the head. I think the world's minority has to move to that in order to stay in control.
Well, I'm going to take another viewpoint. we had what we call the Republican Revolution with Newt Gingrich and his minions back in 1994, I
Yeah,
guess
but
it was.
they've improved.
And let me tell you, everybody, you know, there was doom and gloom, and everybody thought it was, you know, the end was near back then. And what did those guys do? They found a way to blow it. Hubris is always a part of this equation. And you've got the group in Washington now who haven't been able to stop gloating and crowing since the day after the election.
I'm not worried about the group.
I'm
worried about the group in Washington's training. You know, George is being mentored by his two 70-year-old buddies there, Dick Cheney and Donnie Baby, and Ashcroft.
And his father.
And now they got all these new ones coming along. Coleman, what's the guy's name in Georgia? And then the end for me is when they picked that idiot from North Carolina, Elizabeth Dole. That told me what I needed to know. I didn't need to know any more than that. This is a woman that ran the most corrupt charitable organization in the country, who helped prolong the AIDS thing with their blood banks. The Red Cross.
Well, I'm worried about the millions of Americans that make all that possible and acceptable.
Well, they're accepting it, Larry.
And I don't believe they're going to change. I don't feel anywhere near as optimistic as Vaughn does.
Does there something you think for age? I think he's a little younger.
Sure.
Then he's younger than us.
I think so. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think our years have made us probably a lot more cynical than him.
well,
And I mean, you know, I was talking to you, and I mean, and I'm a little younger than you, but I have never remembered a time when we haven't been at war. There hasn't been a time in my adult life that we haven't been at war with someone somewhere. And that's why I asked this
Well,
question.
the late 50s.
Oh, God, what are you talking about?
Korea was over by then.
We were already in Vietnam, Vaughn.
Well, we didn't get into Vietnam until
Vaughn,
1960.
we were sending troops and advisors to Vietnam. When Diem Phu fell, we started the next year selling arms and so forth into South Vietnam.
But we weren't at war.
Vaughn, when people die for other people's causes, it's obvious that you're someone who has never had the joy of serving the man in that respect. And I'm glad that you missed out on it.
I'm not.
So am I.
I'm not.
But I tell you something.
I'm not glad at all.
And then there's another part of American history that nobody wants to talk about. There's a part of Larry and I's history, a lot more than for 52 years. We have been patrolling 37 miles, 2.5 miles wide, the DMZ.
Right,
Men and women have been killed in the DMZ for 52 years, and we
Right.
never talk about it.
right,
We never talk about it. It's still going on. My granddaughter just came back from there.
right.
Damn it. Enough is enough.
Which is why you and I are not
so
optimistic.
cynical.
That's right.
We invaded Panama. You know, this ain't the first time that we invaded a country of color to throw out somebody for doing some illegal thing, another regime, under the guise that he was selling dope. If we invaded every country that was selling dope in America, we wouldn't have enough troops for the next 50 years. Okay?
That's true.
Let's go for the lies. Let's watch who we invade. The Dominican Republic, Grenada. Oh, there was a jive in there.
Yeah, that's
That was such a jive that Clint Eastwood made a movie about it, right? I mean, it's just, you know, it's just, think about where I'm coming from. I mean, and you know, and I said to somebody, I said, now, won't it be interesting? I didn't know that China didn't have weapons of destruction.
right.
I'm being sarcastic now.
Right, I didn't
know that India and Pakistan,
Right.
didn't they have weapons of destruction?
Yeah, you see the whole,
Oh. And North Korea just blatantly came out and said, and most Americans don't understand. Now, I tell you what they said, they and this is this thing that you said that the media does, and how they wield things
right.
with this whole thing. They were going to get them. Let me tell you why we didn't do anything. We didn't threaten North Korea.
There's no oil there.
No, that's not the other reason why. The Chinese told us in 1954, stay the hell out of North Korea. They came across the borders. This was before China had guns. There were so many Chinese coming across the border that MacArthur wanted to drop the atomic bomb. It got him thrown out of Korea.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
It got him thrown out of Korea.
They got him drummed out of the military,
They
too.
drummed out of the military because there's no win.
Right.
There's no win.
Yeah.
And I also find it interesting how we hedge about Taiwan. You know, so what I see us is a big bully.
Yeah. That's how most of Europe sees us now.
Yeah.
If you look at the demonstrations,
a hu-
300,000 people
That's right.
demonstrated in Italy.
Huge bully. Okay?
A swaggering
A
bully.
swaggering huge bully. You know, and I'm saying to myself, oh damn, India's got the bomb. We didn't invade them. Pakistan's got the bomb. We didn't invade them. What's up with that? And then I heard a speaker, and it hit me. He said only England and France can have, and America can have weapons of
But you see,
destruction.
this seems so transparent to me.
And
It is.
Russia?
This
It
is what
is.
I mean.
It is.
It seems so transparent. Why doesn't everybody understand this?
Because, as I say, critical thinking is in short
Critical
supply.
thinking, and Vaughn has hit the nail on the head. Now, the other thing that drives me crazy, and the reason why I brought up the percentage is, I am tired of soldiers of color being sent off to war and coming back to a society that is so slanted that they can be shot for taking their wallet out of their pocket at midnight in New York City on any given night. Or they can be stopped on a road. Okay, we get 30% of the action. We represent 11% of the population.
And every time we go, we think that when we come back, it's going to be
And
a
that's
different
why
country.
you and I are cynical, because ain't
course.
nothing changed.
Of course, nothing
And
changes.
don't run Colin Powell in my face and say, see,
Nothing
that's how
changes.
things change.
Nothing
Yeah,
changes.
right.
Condoleezza Rice is not indicative for me of change. And certainly that fool that sits on the Supreme Court, what's his name?
Clarence Thomas.
Oh yeah, I always forget his name. I have senior moments about him.
You don't even say it correctly.
It's Clarence.
That's right.
Thank you.
How you
Sorry.
say it?
Clarence.
Plants.
Clarence.
But Vaughn, go back to the war thing, and it's the most
Or
dangerous.
or as a friend of mine calls him, Tom-ass Clarence.
That's terrible. Man. Let's go.
Well, Harry Belafonte was right, my man. And unfortunately, I had a lot of admiration in a lot of ways for the career that he wielded for himself, for Powell. I mean, not Powell. Yeah, Colin.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But if there ever was a black in America, there's ever a time that didn't have to sell out to any side or the other, who has given over some, and I know that. And you know what drives me crazy? He and the generals, and especially the generals like him and Schwarzkopf and them, who came through Vietnam, know what these kind of wars lead to.
Well, of course.
See, these wars ain't the left flank charging the right flank and the thing. This is about house to house, tunnels, and
And an incredible occupancy after the
That's
war,
right, yeah.
which is going to soak
Who's
up
gonna
so many
occupy that?
dollars. Well, that's one question. The second is, where's all the money going to come from?
Yeah.
them 800,000 workers, like Vaughn pointed out, who weren't going to get their checks. And those people who didn't get their raises this year who voted for him.
man, it's just
What's the first thing he
incredible.
did? And then the other thing is, for 175,000 workers, he took their union rights away from them. And they gave them that.
Yep.
See, we are headed toward Big Brother.
Yeah, I know. That's why it's hard to say. It's
To be
hard,
optimistic.
It's hard to stop with, we're going to get what we deserve, because I don't want what we deserve.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. We don't
I
want it.
don't want what we deserve. But,
Well,
but you're right. We're going to get it, and that's what's so sad.
Well, I'm going to go back to that other card I'm going to play every now and then. You know, ain't nobody in my family put us down this road. Ain't nobody look like me. And that's why I'm worried about Colin, because Colin need to quit.
But there are people like you who are going to suffer from all this,
True.
All over the world.
But
right in your family.
That's
yeah,
right.
yes, but you don't have to suffer in silence. There are a couple of anti-war organizations.
Yes, there
that
are, and that's
organizing
the
in this country now.
Oh.
One is called Not in My
Yes.
Name.
Yes.
Not in my name.
Not in
is
my
a good
name.
one. That's a
Yes.
good one.
And-
But also the Peace and Justice
And you-
Center, and I want to give the Peace and Justice Center, because we're on their review. They have stood against this war from the beginning.
Yes, and if there's anything that gives me even a thread of hope, it's the anti-war movement, which seems to be growing every moment,
Yeah, especially in Europe
especially in Europe, but also here.
and here.
Yeah,
Like
especially here.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
and so
and the other night
so
I
all of
watched
us
it, and there was
ought to be
another one that I
involved in
watched
this.
with great interest, and our producer, Ed Everett, was on with his group. Did you see that? Talking about why the war in Iraq, and it's a very good tape for you all to see. It comes on Channel 15 on the Peace and Justice Review. It's Veterans Against.
15. Invite me over so I can see it. I'm serious. I'm not trying to be funny.
Okay.
I don't get 15.
Okay.
And I'd like to.
Yeah, come on over.
All right.
And so, but it really is important to note that, and this is where I do view Vermont as being unique. But as far as being pretty, hell no, excuse me. I got to get my shot in.
Would
Okay?
you
I wouldn't
warn
care.
me when you're getting ready to say something like that, please? Because I'm getting old, you know. And
I don't care how
I
old
can't
you
stand
get.
shocks like that.
You always tell me you're old, but you're always
you-
up before me and
You
going
have a
longer
good
than me.
word to say about
Yeah.
Vermont? Phew.
And so consequently,
Wow.
what I'm saying though, and get be serious, is
Yeah.
though, is back to what Vaughn is saying. I think he's saying, and also there's this misconception out there, and I'm glad, and this is why I want to do this program. What I haven't seen was people of color on these channels talking about why we're against the war. Why do we join the service, Vaughn?
Because there's so few other outlets and opportunities.
Thank you. I know when I was coming along, and people don't want to hear this, in the late 50s and 60s, it was the best opportunity in the world.
Yeah.
Believe me, you could earn rank, you could earn the right, because not all of us could be Jackie Robinson or Larry McCory, be the first. No, and I mean that in a good way, Larry, in terms of being, but we were looking for places where we could be, for our brains and ability, even it meant our life. I considered very seriously staying there.
And it was an opportunity for a group that
Yeah,
has
because
so
Chappie,
little
and people don't
opportunity.
realize this. Chappie James
Right.
happened before
Right, of course.
Colin, where he was the deputy commander-in-chief.
sure.
You know, I mean, so it was at that time, I'm given all its limitations, the fairest part of American institutions for you to be a person
that's
of
right.
color in terms of rank and so forth, and ability to advance.
And frankly, nowadays, what you have in the military are kids who are looking at it as a way to earn some money for college.
Yeah.
That's why they join.
And a way out.
And a way out of whatever it is they're in. And I don't think any of them had any real appetite or have any real appetite for invading a foreign country and possibly occupying it for the next 15 to
You mean
20 years.
you don't think everybody goes for the proud, the few? I just know that in my own
That's a
immediate,
rhetorical question.
in my own immediate family,
Is that what that was?
I
Yeah.
think that's what it was, Larry.
3 generations of us, starting with me,
That's right.
my daughter,
That's right.
and now my granddaughter. And it drives me crazy because I don't ever see them on the screen. Katie Couric never has them on. Diane Sawyer don't have them on. What's up? Where's that 30% hidden?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not relegated to the things that Larry had to go through when he was in the service.
I was about to say, because you're talking about a different
Yeah.
a different service, you know, and I agree with you. The 60s, that's absolutely correct.
Yeah. By the time I came along,
The service that I was
Truman
in
had
was not
signed that
like that.
mandate.
Right.
You know, Congress never signed that mandate. That was presidential order.
I know.
This is what they use.
I know.
And see, this is the danger of all
You see,
this
which
stuff.
is something else that people don't understand. That wasn't Congress.
That's right.
That was one person.
That's right.
That was Truman.
Affirmative action in this country started with a presidential order.
That is correct. And it certainly wasn't the army that I was in.
That's right. I remember the civil rights movement got protected by troops in Arkansas because a Republican president sent the troops in Arkansas in.
Yes,
This is how far to the right we have swung.
that's right.
And this was
That's right.
during the time the end of McCarthyism.
Not that he wanted to.
Not that he wanted to, but at the end, he
But
did it.
He
At
did.
the end, he had no choice.
But he made the right choice. He had no problem making the right choice, and this is what I question now. Do we have that kind of leadership now? This was an Army general who had just won the biggest war in the history of mankind and was one of the two biggest heroes in this country. MacArthur and Eisenhower, you couldn't walk down the street not know who they were. If you were 7 or 8 years old, you knew who they were.
Sure.
Yet, there was a line drawn that I don't see drawn anymore. The Marshall Plan in Europe was initiated by an Army general. The saving of Europe happened because of George Marshall.
Yep.
We have civilians now who ain't never spent a day walking in their life for nothing, dictating the policy and going against the will of generals, because if you listen to the undercurrent of this war stuff, Vaughn, they are at the mercy of their commander-in-chief.
Well, yeah, it's true.
But some of the strongest anti-war
Right.
things that are being said right now are being
coming
said
from
by
military.
generals.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Guys who already served.
Absolutely.
Guys who've seen combat
And
and
they
know what it's all
understand.
about.
Well, once you've been in harm's
They
way, you know what
understand
that's
it.
about. See, it
They
ain't about
understand it.
it ain't about what John Wayne did
And
on the
it-
screen.
and it's not about being afraid.
No.
It's not about
It's
being
about
afraid.
reality.
It's about reality.
Yeah.
It's about understanding reality.
You know, and I will point out to people, one of the most tragic circumstances and outcomes of the Vietnam War was not just the 58,000 that we lost and the sanction part that we talk, because we don't talk about what was lost before 1964
Right.
in Vietnam.
Right.
But if you go to Oregon and places like that, other states that are beautiful and rural,
I told you he's not giving it up.
I know.
you will see veterans who lost their lives in Vietnam before 1964 listed.
Yeah.
Right.
So consequently, what I'm trying to point out, though, is that we are, probably it is one of the most dangerous times, is that we are ignoring those people who know best. 58,000 lost dead, recognized dead. Another 58,000 that committed suicide in those years. These are young people we're talking about.
Yeah.
The flower, America, and all that stuff they tell us about how it's the fruit. You know what drives me crazy? Is when I see Bush and Laura Bush come out, and some of them come out, oh, we have a program for the young people of America.
Oh, yeah.
And my young program for the young people of America is, can we bring some of them troops home?
Yeah.
Can we stop being the policeman for the world? Do you think there's ever a time that a country somewhere can cure its problems internally without us using the domino theory?
Yeah. I don't disagree with anything you said.
Nothing.
And I think, I would add that if you
We
look...
have 5 minutes, Vaughn, and I want you to
understand.
take it over.
No, I'm not going to take it over.
No, I
I'm
want
not
you to
sure. But if you look at who is beating the war drums down in Washington, you have to ask yourself, what military background do these people have? Donald Rumsfeld. He came of age during the Korean War. He could have served in active armed combat had he wanted to, but he sat that one out with a student deferment at Princeton. Dick Cheney, another one. He could have gone to Vietnam, but he chose to do otherwise. George W. Bush.
Oh, well, George, did
No,
not.
he was in the Texas Air National Guard, probably, enjoying himself at the Officers Club. And then, of course, we get to our National Security Advisor, Ms. Condoleezza Rice.
Oh, please.
Oh, no.
Okay, go ahead.
Who I think is probably the most dangerous of them all, primarily because she projects a kind of mad certainty, which we saw with the best
Larry,
and
did
the
you write
brightest.
that sentence down?
The best and the brightest,
I wish I could. She's
who led us into the quagmire
Yeah,
of Vietnam.
she's bright.
She led us.
She's super bright.
She's super bright.
No question about it. She's a very smart woman. But the problem
Very
is that
dangerous.
she's an academic. She spent her entire life
Right.
in the academy. She has no practical experience beyond the academy. And for people like that, for people who have that kind of mindset, ideas are more real to them than humans and human problems. And
Human
I
life
think
becomes not important.
it's not. And I think that's what really makes her a dangerous person, especially with the kind of power she wields in Washington.
She's a planet pal, right?
Well, I wouldn't say that.
She, Rumsfeld, and Cheney.
Well, I think they're co-equals in the administration. It depends on who has the presidency there at any given time. It seems as though Powell was down for the count, but got up off the canvas and made his point and got everybody to buy into the notion that the United States could not go it alone, which is what the others were arguing.
I'm worried about with that, because I want to answer.
And I want to,
You asked the question.
I have a question.
Because I can imagine.
And this is just
Right.
an opinion that I'm looking for.
Okay.
Let's make the assumption that something, that nothing is found. In other words, that we satisfy the UN part of this. Do you think that we will still go it alone? Do you think that's still a possibility?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Unfortunately,
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I think that Blair is going to back him, and I think that's the big whole card, this whole thing. That England
too.
still holds
That's right.
that kind of worldwide acceptance that we don't have,
That's right.
Yeah.
you know.
And I think that's all he needs.
Well, there have been massive demonstrations against this war proposal in the United Kingdom, and
Yeah.
many of the demonstrators there have labeled Tony Blair George Bush's lapdog, and
I
I can't argue with that either.
I can see how they could come to that conclusion.
yeah. But I mean, if it's business as usual, then Tony Blair and his minions, the British and the Americans, will divvy up the oil spoils in Iraq and undercut OPEC, and everything will be.
I think that we have
copacetic.
just scratched the surface. We have a minute to go. And,
I don't think we have a minute any longer.
No, it's
No.
about 30 seconds.
Right. So why don't
But
you-
Ed is going to be
why don't you-
calling me to set up some more time, Vaughn. I want to continue this discussion.
It's fine with me.
And I really think that you bring a lot of stuff to the table, because it allows Larry and I to be emotional, and you could be, and I think it's
It's
important.
beautiful, isn't it?
It really is, and consequently, but I want to put to rest that only one part of the population cares about ending this war. I just want to point out that the biggest push that the anti-war movement got in the 1960s was from Martin Luther King. We are not pro-war as a
And
people.
don't forget Muhammad Ali.
And Muhammad Ali didn't step across the line, and is the only person I've seen give up. So I just want to say thank you. We will be back, the three of us, to continue this discussion. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Very hard, yeah, to find any help.
I'm reopening with the same line that I made about J.C. Watt's father, commenting to him when he found out that J.C. was going to be a Republican and was going to run for the Congress. He said being a black Republican was like chickens being friends with Colonel Sanders. And that leads me, Larry, J.C. Watts, as you know, the only black Republican member of the House, and some 42 black Democrats in the House. And the Republican Party and George Bush going on about how they're reaching out to all communities, and then Trent Lott with this statement that he made, which is not a new statement because he's made this statement more than once publicly. We were talking before the show, and you said that what are you surprised about? Could you repeat that again?
I'm not surprised at anything. I'm surprised that people are surprised. I mean,
these people, his colleagues, those people who sing with him and all that, I mean, they know perfectly well where this man is coming from. They hear his comments as they sit and have a drink someplace or,
Wait a minute, there's only one senator that came out with a public statement.
well, I don't want to dump on Jim.
Now, I don't want to dump on Jim either, but I think that Jim needs to take in consideration
Right,
that there's a lot of things that I agree with him about, some things I don't agree with him, but the issue of race in America, I think that Jim needs to re-educate himself about how serious these problems are, and it's typical of viewpoints that I've heard in Vermont over the course of years.
well, in all fairness, I think most, if not all, of the senators and so forth need to re-educate themselves if they're serious about the race thing. If it's just a political ploy, then that's one thing. Then they'll go on with business as usual. But if they're really serious about trying to at least reduce the racial tension in this country, if not to solve it, then they need to re-educate themselves, because I don't think they get it. I don't think they really understand.
What is it you think they don't understand?
And we've said that for a long time. We've said that for a long time. But let's go back to this one issue. There is no way in the world that I can believe that his fellow senators don't know where he's coming from. Don't know that he has, I mean, all of them know about his background. All of them know about his membership in the White Citizens Council and so forth. They know very well what Trent Lott believes about this whole racial thing. The fact that it is never said is a whole political thing. I mean, even George Bush understands that, okay? That you don't say these kind of things if you're going to try to lure more black voters onto your side. So it was stupid to say it. But in terms of belief, most of those people, if not all of them, carry these kind of racist beliefs within themselves. I mean, these studies have been done. We know where white America is coming from, for goodness sake. So where's the surprise? And therefore, in answer to your question, I am surprised that people are surprised.
There's a part of me that, you know, the cryptic and cynical part that just sat back and said, I don't believe this. And I don't believe the innocence that comes out of senators' mouths and other political leaders in this country.
Precisely.
They're just, it's a totally ridiculous stand for them to take. But don't tell me that you know about racism. I mean, what a large parts of the people in this country know about racism is what men know about men who beat women, which is very little. And that's just how my analogy of that. And you know, and I'm concerned that Jim came out and made the statement that he made based on some camaraderie issue. Believe me, it's not okay. It's a dangerous thing to do, especially in a place that's so overwhelmingly white. And I think back 3 years ago when the whole civil unions thing was passed.
Right,
And the uproar and the nastiness that erupted.
right.
And it was on basically one side of the aisle. And a lot of moderate Republicans were thrown down the drill in that whole election during that time. Take back Vermont, that whole business. Do you remember that?
Do I remember it? It made
And
me
then,
sick.
yeah.
Do I
And now all the
remember?
racist comments that came along with that stuff.
I know, and it's all in the same bag that we're
Right.
talking about. And that's why it's hard for me to understand. I mean, one of the questions that people like you or Vaughn or I are accosted with from white people is, how could people who are supposedly so intelligent like the three of you are, that's a compliment, I think, but that's okay, like the three of you are, how can you support people like Jesse Jackson
or like Louis Farrakhan, and so forth and so on. They have the nerve to ask me that question, and yet look at the people that they support. They support the Trent Lotts of the world, White Citizens Council member,
And
for
Strom
example.
Thurmond.
They support the Strom
Jerry
Thurmonds,
Vaughn.
and nobody ever asks a question. Nobody questions these people. They're buddy
They changed. Didn't you understand that? Jesse Helms and
Oh,
Strom
come
Thurmond
on.
changed.
Come on, please. I mean, give me a break. But
So white people can change, but black people can't.
that is correct. That's correct.
That's the other underlying theme of
I
this.
know, but that's all. These things have always been true.
My other big concern is how the media has tried to alleviate this situation by saying certain things like, well, when is forgiveness coming?
Right.
There's a word that I really crack up about, which is forgiveness.
Well, I believe in it. I believe in it, but
They're still playing for those ill-timed remarks that Jesse made some
That's
20
right.
years ago.
That's right.
He's still paying dues
he's still
for it.
paying dues for it.
Louis Farrakhan.
And this man wants to be forgiven.
Right.
Because he spoke out of turn, not because he's any different than he ever was. I mean, you know better than that. We
Louis
all know better
Farrakhan was
than
censured,
that. Yes, I know.
right?
I know.
He was censured by the Senate.
Yes.
Bill Clinton was censured by the Senate recently.
Yeah. So we'll see how this plays out, and we don't know yet. But again, well, I don't know what to say.
Well, what I'm getting sick and tired of on both sides of the aisle, how white politicians always play the race card. Bill Clinton did it his first election to the thing when he did the whole Sister Soldier thing. Remember the attacks he made on Sister Soldier?
Yes, I do.
That got him. That helped get him elected. The Reagan administration did it with the Willie Horton situation against Dukakis.
You know, first of all, I don't think it's very difficult, I guess, for white people to ever look at themselves and to try to find out who they are in the sense of what their whiteness means to them. And of course, sociological experiments have been done in this regard where they ask white people, what does it mean to be white? And they can't answer the question. And it's because they never, or very seldom, have this need for introspection, to look at themselves and to uncover the racism there. And
Until they're accused of it.
until they're accused of it, and then they get defensive. Trent Lott, for example, keeps saying, I'm not a racist. Well, first of all, we need to understand that a racist, that's a noun. That's a noun, and that's a person who lives out all of these stereotypical beliefs and so forth, but lives them out in the sense of everything that one does is based on that. The KKK people, for example, or the skinheads and so forth and so on. That's different from the adjective racist. And it's very difficult for white people to grow up in the United States and not have racist beliefs, because the whole social structure, the whole socialization process, their development is on this basis. Every value construct in this society pushes in that direction. It's very difficult, for example, for black people to grow up without some bit of self-hatred, without some feelings of inferiority.
Or what they
but by
call-
the same token, it's very difficult
Because
for
I
white
don't know if
people
I
to grow
like
up
that term.
without the supremacy thing.
I don't know if I like that term, internalized racism.
Okay. You may or may not like it.
But I think black people, because
It's
of
real.
the atmosphere that is set, also
real.
grow up with their own discriminatory problems.
Of course. But that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Because this society
Demands that.
demands that, and we're taught these things. I mean, the children are socialized to believe these things. Studies have been done which show that racism gets into little white kids by the time they're 4 or 5 years old. They pick up all these things from wherever, from their parents, from the schools, from the books that they read, from the curriculum. I'm not making this up.
Well, what do
These-
you
these
say?
studies have
What do
been
you
done.
say to the Joe Liebermans and the George Bushes
Well,
and the Condoleezza Rices and the Colin Powells who say things are getting better?
well, well, you know what I say. I mean, things are worse now than they were 10 years ago.
But has the
In the sense-
racism evolved, Larry, into a new, different kind of language?
Of course, racism has changed. I mean, you can call
Give
it.
me some
You can
examples.
call it progress. For example, the following: that had this man made this statement 20 years ago, people would have been upset.
And he would have been
I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, they would not have been upset. I mean, it would have just passed off. We would have raised all.
Well, he
kind of
made the
Cain.
statement 30
We would have
years ago in
I
people.
know it, but that's what I'm
22
saying.
years ago, he made the statement.
But that's what I'm
actually.
saying. I'm saying that it would have been acceptable then, even though we would have raised all kind of Cain.
But we
about
also
it.
had a president at the time who accepted it.
That's what I'm saying. And so one could call it progress
Okay.
that all this fuss now is being made by this. Now, that's progress, but it's so minuscule compared to how big this Malcolm said it better than anyone. He said you can put somebody in jail on trumped up charges, okay? And then put them in solitary confinement, even though all the charges have been trumped up. And then a few years later, take them out of solitary confinement and let them roam around with the other prisoners. You can call that progress if you want to, but they shouldn't have been jailed in the first place. You see? And so that's what I'm saying. So yes, you can call it progress that we're raising all this Cain about what he said now, whereas 20 or 30 years ago when he said the very same things, it was acceptable. Yes, that's progress, but it's so minuscule compared to the whole thing of institutional racism that, as far as I'm concerned, we haven't moved at all.
So Don Nichols may not be an improvement over Trent Lott. He'll just be smarter about keeping his
To be
mouth
smarter, just as Bush is. Bush is upset. He's terribly upset. Now, is he upset because of Trent Lott's racist statements? Not really.
What do
He's
you think he's
upset
upset
because
about?
he was stupid enough to say them, and thereby undermine Bush's intent to try to lure more black voters in. Now, I guess that's good. I mean, I'm glad that the statement has been called into question and so forth and so on. But that's not a change in anything. That's not a change. I mean,
So you don't really think Strom Thurmond changed or Jesse Helms? You think there's anything as compassionate as conservatism?
oh, please, child, please, don't insult me, okay?
Okay.
Please. I mean, this country is so racist, it's just unbelievable. And all of us know this. I mean, all black people know it because they live it every moment of their existence. They don't have, we don't have the luxury of not looking at ourselves.
So are you saying, see, because Spike Lee made on Good Morning America, made the two most prominent Afro-American members of the Bush cabinet have been very mum in the past week.
And I think they will be mum.
Why? That's Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice.
Because not to be mum means not to be a member of that team anymore. I'm serious. I mean,
So J.C. Watts, because he was leaving, could say whatever he wanted to say,
of course,
which he did.
which he did.
Now, Clarence Thomas had
Shocked me. I almost drove off the road. No, I'm serious. No, I am not kidding. I told some friends of mine, I was driving down the road going home the other day, and the woman came on and said that Clarence Thomas had just interjected, into this back and forth thing, because I was listening to the whole Supreme Court, listening to arguments on both
Right.
sides. And it was making me sicker and sicker because, cross burning. I mean, how can you debate this thing? But that's okay. That's all right. So now it's back and forth. And then Clarence Thomas threw in a ringer. I mean, and the woman who was describing this said that he was passionate I mean, it's one of the few times, she said, one of the few times that I've ever seen him passionate. He was passionate when he talked about cross burning.
He was
and
more than
how
passionate.
horrendous- Yeah, of course. I mean, so I mean, I almost drove off the road. I couldn't believe it because I've lost all faith in Clarence Thomas. Okay, I really have. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, it's a tragedy. When I think of the people of color who are not lawyers, but who are more than lawyers. I mean, who really understand the law in a theoretical sense and so forth and so on, who would have been qualified to be Supreme Court justices. When I think of people like that, like Leon Higginbottom, or Bell,
Right.
okay? When I think of people like that, and then I look at Clarence Thomas, I say, oh my God, what a tragedy. However, what he said the other day just shocked me like crazy. And I'm delighted that he said it, and I hope he sticks to that, because it's absolutely true.
I think that they bring, see, I think we all have something in our common experience as a people of color, as black people in particular, no matter how conservative we may see ourselves. I think there's something in that experience that sooner or later will ring our bell.
Especially if the black person that we're talking about, the us's that we're
Right.
talking about, are from the United States.
Absolutely.
Now, see, it may be different from the islands, because the islands had a whole different history. I mean, you look at the Caribbean, for example, even though there are many similarities, but they had a different kind of slave system, for example. Babies were not snatched away from mothers in the Caribbean or in South America as they were in the United States. The history was different. And that doesn't mean that we are different from them, but there are some differences. And I think that black people who grow up in the United States, who have grown up in the United States and are grown up in the United States, I think what you just said is absolutely correct. All of us have something which is going to yank our chain. Now, we can play this game if we want to. We can be rich Republican Negroes. See, we can be that. We can be that, and we can have art, all kind of art hanging in our houses, and we can afford all these things like Brother Johnson can, of Black Entertainment Television. That's great. That's all well and good. But something will yank our chain. It may be because we can't get a taxi cab in New York City. It may be that. Or it may be the cross-burning thing. But something will yank our chain because all of us have a common heritage in this country.
Like Danny Glover not being able to get a cab, right?
Of course. Of course. I mean,
Cornel West.
And that whole business, who was it? Was it no, I've forgotten. Diane Sawyer. Was it Diane Sawyer who did this on television, where they had the white murderer, had the white murderer released from prison. He was one of the people getting a cab, and they had this very prominent black actor, dressed beautifully and so forth.
And he got passed.
And over and over and over again, the cabs would not stop for him, but would stop for this white. I mean, this is the United States. This is the way it works here. And so all of us have that common thing. And we can make believe it's not happening. We can make believe we have somehow risen above it. I mean, I have so much education and so much money, and I'm just, these things don't affect me anymore, okay? I'm not black, I'm an American. What kind of nonsense is that?
Well, let's talk about that.
What kind of nonsense is that?
Well, let's you and I talk about that, because we grew up in similar circumstances and have tasted it. Aren't you appalled by the white people who assume, because we both known some success in our life, that somehow we've thrown away our years of experience and growing up in this country?
Of course.
That somehow we're going to allow them to say or do whatever they want around, and then they become shocked when we don't go along with the program.
No, because I'm not going to allow them to get away with it. I'm sorry. I no longer, listen, my sun does not rise or set any longer in what white people think about me. Fortunately, I got over that. Now, let me tell you, I grew up that way. I grew up that way, and I'll be the first one to admit it. But thanks to Connie,
Right.
Connie M., my wife,
Right.
and thanks to Malcolm X, those two people, at least I was able to get over that. And I don't care what they see any longer when they look at me. It just doesn't matter to me anymore. Okay?
Well, the biggest influence in my life around these issues, as you know, was my father.
Yeah, I know. Your father.
And I was laying
and you're
in bed.
very lucky.
Yeah.
You're very lucky.
I was
to have had
laying
a
in
father
bed the
like
other night thinking about what my father would have to say about it. Now, my father probably would have called me up on the phone and said, well, here's a shock.
that. Yeah.
Trent Lott
Yeah,
made a
here-
racist statement.
Yeah, right. Here's a shock.
Here's a shock. And then he would have had more comments to make about the person he was praising. Because I remember that whole incident occurring when Strom Thurmond, and I remember my parents being upset at that time when Strom Thurmond announced he was going to run for president. Those were dangerous times for black Americans. I went to school in South Carolina, Larry, in the 50s. And do I forgive Strom Thurmond? No. Will I ever? Never.
Okay, but then let's imagine, let's think of an imaginary white person in the United States, okay, who really believes in equality, who really believes in justice, who really thinks that racism is wrong, who really thinks that segregation is wrong, who has all these beautiful ideas and
Yes.
ideals. Let's think of that person. Wait a
Yeah,
minute.
I'm
Let's
listening.
think of that person. How can you hang out with people like you're talking about? How can you consider them friends? How can you want to?
I've always
how
wondered.
can you want to
I've always
socialize
wondered
with
that.
them? Okay, that's what I can understand.
And I don't buy into it.
Okay, that's what I can't understand.
I'm saying that there's a connect between them. And the connect
And
is
so
their
am I.
privilege.
And so am I. I'm saying there's a connect too. They all belong to the same club.
And their privilege.
Okay, that's exactly what I'm saying.
So I don't trust liberals any more than I trust conservatives.
Oh, neither do I.
To me, they're words.
Either do I.
Okay?
Either do I.
And I think they both manipulate to get the vote.
And that doesn't mean, I mean, let's be
That doesn't
clear
mean-
about this. That
'cause
doesn't
I
mean
also
that
feel-
every white person that I see
Right.
is a racist.
That's right.
Nobody's saying that.
Right.
I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that white people grow up in a country, in a society, which builds into them racist notions. And that in order to overcome those things, they have to, number one, educate themselves, and number two, fight it every day of their existence, just like you and I have to fight every day of our existence. That's
Well-
what I'm saying. And there are very few people who can or want to do that.
Here's some new words that I see them throwing around. Tolerance.
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to be tolerated.
I don't want to be tolerated either.
Because that's where tolerance comes from, doesn't it? Is a derivative of the word.
The last time I checked, yes.
Yeah. See, and I hate these tolerance programs. I hate words used. Don't give me no tolerance.
Well,
In fact,
listen, I have come to hate diversity. And I don't mean that I hate the concept
Yeah,
of diversity.
I know where you're
because
coming from.
diversity is very, very important.
Very divisive.
We need to have, okay?
and diversity is about divisive, right?
But diversity has been used as sort of a goal, okay? And let me tell you something, as you very clearly pointed out at the Civil Rights Commission hearing not too long ago, you can be as diverse as you can possibly imagine and yet live in a very racist environment. So diversity does not get rid of racism. As a matter of fact, it may even perpetuate it if you don't do something about the racism. Because then you begin to get the layering. Then
you play one group off
you play
against the
one
other,
group off against another. And
which
boy,
is another.
of course.
which is another
So
form
it's not that we're against diversity. That
Right.
is one necessary step in a long progression of things which needs to happen. But if we're not going to deal with anti-racism, you ought to forget about diversity. I mean, listen, and it's not about numbers. You see, Mississippi, since as far back as I have ever read about Mississippi, has had more black people than white people. What difference does it make? Whites are in power. I don't care how many black people live in Mississippi. They essentially have no power
Well, I
in this
found interesting.
society.
Have you watched the news recently? When
So
this
that's
whole
not where it is.
Trent Lott thing?
It's undoing racism. It's undoing the privilege that.
Yeah, but
that
did you
you're
watch the
talking
Trent Lott stuff?
about. I
any
watch
of it?
as much as I can, John.
Well,
John,
don't you
I'm
find it interesting?
John, I'm getting old.
No, but listen, this is a newscast.
watch much
No, but
more
here's
of
the
that
news in America who play an important part in this issue we're talking about, Larry. Because newscasts and news and the media perpetuates racism and how they present the news.
Of course.
And they come up with all this BS they come up with.
Of course.
And they were showing Mississippi. A white jazz club and a black nightclub. I found that interesting, the names that were used, okay, for the two establishments.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, interesting.
Yes, very interesting.
Oh, and language is very important.
And so consequently, the whites were going, he's apologized and
Right.
and he, you know, and I know him, and I've known Trent Lott. We went to school together. Well, good.
And I'm sure you did.
And I'm sure y'all did. And since y'all went to school together and separate, I know there were no black children in your school.
And I can hear the things that you said.
Then I can imagine what y'all had to say about that. And consequently,
We went to school together.
yeah, and here in the black bar, they're saying, nah, the apology is not enough. See, what people don't fail to realize is you don't heal the kind of scars that were inflicted in 420 years and 30 years. Because that's what we're talking about. And segregation is not over. You just have invented new forms of segregation.
That's right.
And what white people are punishing Trent Lott for, I feel, is having the stupidity to say that stuff out in the open so that black folks will know, if they didn't know there's something wrong with them, that it's alive and well in America today. Trent Lott's big mistake in the white community was that he said this stuff where it could be repeated back. This was for private conversations.
That's right.
This was for club members only.
And I would like to meet the white person who has not heard this stuff in
That's
private
right.
conversations.
Because I'm going to tell you, and
I mean, come on.
And I'm going to show you something that just went on. Just recently, you know, another big struggle was the whole Tiger Woods issue. Should Tiger Woods play at Augusta?
I know.
Now, 2 days ago, I'm looking, Jack Nicklaus is being interviewed on one of those sports programs. He says, I'm a member. I've won 6 times
Right.
the Masters.
Right.
And Hootie Johnson runs Atlanta, the Augusta Golf Club.
Right.
And therefore, I'm going to follow his rules as a member.
Right.
I didn't have to pay because I won 6 times. Now I want to know
Right.
why
Right.
Jack Nicklaus gets away, who's won 6 times,
Right.
and at least 5 of those times when blacks couldn't play in the tournament.
That is correct.
Is not being
and not
pressured.
one question.
And not one question.
Not one question about it. Okay.
About and then sits there and says, yes, I'm a member,
Yes.
and ain't nobody upset. Nobody's upset.
Right.
They're upset with a 25-year-old young black man
Right.
who has the audacity to be the best in the world at a game that they don't want us to play in the first place, and definitely not to be the best at it. And so there's a lot of similarities in what they're saying, because I'm taking these 2 issues of this is new form of racism that I see, because Tiger Woods is a victim of that new form of racism. See, it's okay for Jack Nicklaus to say no. It's not okay for Tiger Woods to say no.
That is correct.
It's okay for Jack Nicklaus to make millions and millions of dollars, but it's not okay for Tiger Woods.
John.
And that's why I'm saying,
Lillian Smith.
yes, Killers of the
Lillian
Dream.
Smith talked about this in the 1930s. White Southern author, Lillian Smith.
Killers of the Dream.
And in her book, Killers of the Dream, she talked about this moral schizophrenia. She talked about holding these opposing views in one's head and in one's heart.
You mean that part where she says, I learned it is possible
May I quote from
Yes,
it?
please do.
Because this is this, and I've heard you say this, and I'm going to say it and give you credit for having said it. I wish every white person in the United States would read Lillian Smith's Killers of the Dream. Just read the book, that's all. Anyway, in talking about this double social and psychological consciousness, which I'm calling a moral schizophrenia, here's what Lillian Smith wrote, 1930s now, okay? The mother who taught me what I know of tenderness and love and compassion taught me also the bleak rituals of keeping Negroes in their place. The father who reminded me that all men are brothers trained me in the steel rigid decorums I must demand of every colored male. They who so gravely taught me to split my body from my mind and both from my soul taught me also to split my conscience from my acts and Christianity from my Southern tradition. Let me read you one more thing that she said about
she's
this.
so powerful.
I know. From the day I was born,
Oh, yes.
I began to learn my lessons. I learned that it's possible to be a Christian and a white Southerner simultaneously, to be a gentlewoman and an arrogant, callous creature in the same moment. I learned to believe in freedom, to glow when the word democracy was used, and to practice slavery from morning to night. I learned it by closing door after door until one's mind and heart and conscience are blocked off from each other and from reality.
Some of the most powerful words.
She understood the whole thing.
I'm telling you, I wish not only for white people, I want some black
Well, of
people
course.
to read this book also,
Well, of
to
course.
understand. And what bothers me about Lillian Smith is all the other books that she's read is how little she's talked about as a feminist, as an individualist, and an anti-racist. And
She should be in the schools. She should
everywhere.
be all over the place.
in fact,
okay?
she was polarized,
Yeah, of course.
set apart.
Yeah, I know.
Even
of
had to-
course, because it's un-American, John. Come on, please help me.
And I told you this a long time ago. And again, like you said, I was lucky I had the kind of father I had. I read this book the first time when I was 12, going on 13.
Wow.
Because my dad read her.
Well, I've read it 3 times now, and I still don't.
And want to know something?
I still want to read it.
I'm reading it again.
Yeah, okay, that's what I'm saying.
Okay?
Well,
There's certain books that you reread.
Well, let's just say that we're recommending this book very, very highly.
Oh, there's some other books I recommend too.
Yeah, I know.
The Debt
The Debt,
by Randall Robinson,
Faces at the Bottom of the Well by Derek Bell.
by Derek Bell. And then there's a couple of books that I wish, and this is for some black folks to read too. Black Skin with White Faces
Oh, right.
by Frantz Fanon.
White Mask.
White Mask.
Black Skin, White
With-
Mask.
Black Skin, White Mask by Frantz Fanon.
Right.
And Wretched of the Earth.
Right.
Talks about the whole colonization process that took place not only here in America, but took place in Africa and the Caribbean and parts of South America and all over the third world. And I've never figured out what the second world is, but I can't get into that
Well,
right now.
I guess the basic question is, are we serious about wanting to do something about racism in this country?
Here's what I say
And
to
I'm
you.
not convinced that we are.
That's
okay?
what I was going to say.
I'm not convinced that we
It's been going on too long.
Yeah.
It's too much a part of the
Well,
American fabric.
That's what Derek Bell says. We'll never get rid of
We'll
racism.
never get rid of it,
It's
and I
too
agree
much
with
a
him.
part of the American fabric, as you said.
I agree.
However, we have to keep fighting it anyway.
Yes.
And so, as far as people of color are concerned, we have to keep fighting it. But as far as society at large is concerned, I have my doubts, and I hope I'm wrong, but I have my doubts that there's any real intent to try to reduce it or get rid of it.
What bothers me
There's
is
too
they
much,
pull out
there's too much
somebody.
advantage in it.
They pull out somebody like Ward Conley
Yeah,
to respond
yes, I know.
to this Trent Lott
I
situation.
know, but they won't interview
And not
you.
one
They
time,
won't interview you.
they don't need to interview me. But why wasn't Lonnie Grenier interviewed?
Yes, of course. Of course.
One of the most brilliant,
Of course.
legal minds in this
Absolutely.
in this country.
Absolutely.
She was polarized, and Clinton did very little to back her up when he put her up for
No,
nomination.
as a matter of fact, he did her in.
He backed
He
off.
ran away from her.
Right.
Okay.
When prominent,
Yeah.
a prominent
Oh, yeah.
conservative, and this is why this issue about Trent Lott has me so unnerved, because I don't absolve Bill Clinton or Al Gore or Teddy Kennedy or any of them, because he backed off that fight
Yep.
when William Bennett, a prominent conservative, said he read everything she wrote
Right.
and he saw nothing in there
Right.
that was unconstitutional that
Right.
she said.
Right. And he's a conservative.
And he's one of the leading conservative
Of course,
thinkers.
of course.
And legal.
And Clinton still ran away from her.
And Clinton ran
Backed
away
off.
from her.
That's right.
Backed off of her.
Pulled his support.
Fed her to the
And,
lions.
and anybody who has read her, I mean, you have to be struck with her brilliance. You have to be struck with her understanding. Oh, man, it's just incredible. And a
So-
real scholar, a real scholar. I mean, you can't fault her for anything except running against the grain of the United States.
Well, the book that she wrote, the title says it all.
Yeah,
Her most prominent book is Tyranny of the Majority.
that's right.
And I'm telling you that here in Vermont, because it's so small, that tyranny becomes even tougher because of the overwhelming numbers.
Well, I think you're right. In fact, I know you're right. It's just that it sort of dashes my hopes, because I really felt
That it could
once-
change, hadn't it?
I really felt once, and I really felt it deep down inside myself, that the problems that all of us face in this country were at least resolvable in Vermont. I thought that we could make some progress. And I guess I sort of
We know a great man who is local, who lost his governorship because of his stance on
and
racism.
his name is Phil Hoff.
That's right.
And I both love and respect that man, as you do.
That's right.
And I always will. And every time I get a chance, I talk about how he saved
Recently,
us.
he and I disagreed publicly about something. Doesn't all right, because it was a disagreement
that's okay.
that was honest.
That's okay.
And what I found about Phil Hoff that he brings to the table that I don't find very often is he brings a kind of blunt honesty.
Yes.
Now, if you're weak of heart and weak of mind, don't stand within earshot of Phil when,
I know, because he opens up.
that's right.
But you know, boy, I mean, I lived through that stuff, okay? I lived
Through the Irisburg affair.
I lived through that.
And then Phil brought black children up here.
I was part of that.
Right.
So
And then,
so I know
if I'm not
Phil's-
mistaken,
I know
didn't he-
Phil's dedication. I know what he's trying to do, and I know what a horrible cost it was to him.
Yeah.
I know that the political fallout was just unbelievable.
But who helped you when you changed the name of Niggerhead Mountain and Niggerhead Pine?
Yeah.
See, because Vermont has its own history of racism.
Tell me about it. I mean, you and
See,
I.
and the denial factor.
Oh.
Now, let me share something to you personally that just happened to me last week. Last week, I walked into a store in the Burlington Mall. I had forgotten to buy an English friend of mine who was married to my best friend who you knew about
Yes.
and who I
Yep.
lost 2 years ago. And you know he was my closest friend
Yes.
since second grade. His wife is English. And I said, to buy an appropriate present for her, I wanted to get her something in pewter. You know, that's a very English thing. And I go in this store. First, the young woman comes up and, can I help you in that pointed way that they asked you? And I said, no, I'm just looking. Then the older woman came to me right after her, pointedly, can I help you? Then followed me to the other end of the store. Are you sure I can't help you in that pointed way? And then the girl said something to me. And then the woman, to clean it up, and here's this new form of racism that really drives me crazy. It turned out, I found out that they were mother and daughter. The mother points out to me that her daughter's boyfriend was black.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and let me tell you what my comment to her
Did
was.
you feel at home?
Oh, naturally. You know what I told her? I said, Thomas Jefferson had 6 black children that he kept as slaves. And, I mean, do you understand where I'm coming from? You know what the analogy of that? It doesn't do me any good to be in, if you're involved with one black person don't mean that you're involved with, you know, I mean, the racism, Larry, is so entwined that the only thing that she could, once she understood, I understood what they were doing,
Right.
that she could come up with was who her daughter's boyfriend was.
That's right. Some of my best friends are Negroes.
Right.
God, if I had $1 for every time somebody said that to me, I wouldn't be sitting here with you right now. I'd be in the Caribbean.
Yeah, well, and the reason why I'm bringing that up, that's what Jim's unmarks remind me of about the singing with him.
Yeah, I know.
Okay?
I know. I know that.
You know, I mean, there are people in this world that do unbelievably evil things that at some point or the other you have to make yourself a choice. Do I stay around men who beat women? Or am I friends with a rapist?
Precisely what I'm saying. That's precisely what we've been talking about. And you're absolutely correct. And so my question is, how is it that they never ask these questions? They want us to ask these questions about
Well, let me tell you about
Louis
this.
Farrakhan
See,
or somebody,
let's
but
take
they
a
don't
step.
ask these
This
questions.
man,
These questions don't bother them.
This man this man Strom Thurmond,
Yes.
who he praised,
Yes.
okay?
Yeah.
Let me tell you what the big sport in South Carolina was in the 50s. Young black men were caught, and the most intimate parts of their bodies were attacked
Yes.
with sharp objects.
Yes.
And you know that was a common practice.
Yes, I do know that.
Strom Thurmond in 1956 and 57 was a card-carrying Ku Klux Klan member in the state of South Carolina. So what? Because 20 years later he says, it's all cool.
I was wrong.
All those lynchings.
That's right. I was
all
wrong.
those cross burnings.
That's right. That's right.
And then we can go on with the history of this South that we're talking about. There was the Scottsboro boys.
It was Emmett Till.
Emmett Till. Then there was Miss Everett's boys, the young black men who they let syphilis stay in their body so they could see what the ravages of the disease would be on their body. How much are we supposed to forgive? Should we forgive the fact that 3 years ago a young black man reached in his pocket to get his wallet and he was shot 36 times by the police?
Well, now wait a minute now. Now there's a piece in the paper, either today or yesterday, I can't remember.
Oh, by Tim Trino or somebody from Burlington?
Like that, somebody like that who said, look, you have to understand now, the police have to protect themselves.
You mean the police can't tell the difference between, I know we all supposed to look alike, but the police can't tell the difference between a man and a woman?
We have to protect ourselves if we're police. I mean, that woman may have had a AK, whatever those guns are. I don't know anything about guns and don't want to know anything about guns, but
don't you find that interesting?
Yeah, I find it.
Since the statistics in America are just the opposite of that.
I know.
That is white boys who are 4 or 5 times more likely, these are CDC statistics,
I know.
to bring weapons to school.
I know it. I know it.
8 times more likely to have smoked crack.
How many black kids have shot up schools? How many black kids have killed other, just
Random.
random?
But this is the kind of thinking that went on. I just heard a man on a call-in show talk about the Democrats being no good because Jesse Jackson was forgiven.
Right.
And Ted Kennedy, this one you really love, swam away from the car and watched a woman drown.
Right.
I mean, underneath all this false cordiality that people teach in the schools and in their systems and in their churches lies this underlying dislike and rage and hatred that is just waiting to bubble to the surface. I think back some 12 years ago in 1990 when a young black man, 16 years old, walked into Bensonhurst, Brooklyn to buy a used car. and subsequently was beaten to death
Right.
by a mob of 22 young white men.
That wasn't that long ago. When was?
That was
what
in
year was that?
Bensonhurst in 1990.
1990. Okay.
Headlines.
Yes.
Now, they start telling me about what good families these boys came from and so forth and so on. What do you think the headlines would have said in the New York Times, the New York Daily News, and the New York Post if that had been 20 black men who had beat a white boy to death?
Right.
Animals, savage
Right.
beasts.
Right.
Because that's going on in New York right now, because that was the headline 13 years ago in this rape business that
Right.
happened in Central Park.
That's that's what that's what I was about to say. We know what it would have been.
Now, I know for a fact, and people often ask me, I am very cautious up here about what I do in this state, much more so than I was in New York, because I don't want to be the next Scottsboro boy. A good friend of ours now who is dead, he was a good friend of yours and he was an acquaintance of mine, had a white wife, walked onto a lot. They got into an argument because he was 20 minutes late and it was very cold. For 30 days, he couldn't move into his house. A white woman cop observed him, them two arguing. He's 6'3", black as coal. She 5'2" and white. It took her 30 days to understand that they were having a verbal argument like any man and woman would do about that. And this is what I'm saying, Larry. Underneath all that stuff is all this other stuff that goes on in a society that complicates the issue of race. The sexuality issues that never get talked about. For example, I just found out a young white actress who's played in 2 prominent movies that have been they're not big movie makers, but a lot of people go see them. What they call them, there's a term that they use for that. But anyway, on her college campus, she was harassed because she kissed black men in the movies.
Right.
Pierce Bronson get any dirty letters for being all over Holly Berry? See, I think that a lot of white America would like to forgive Trent Lott, and this is why I'm going into that direction. They really are burned up because of the fact that he is even have to pay any dues, because it means that they've got to watch their P's and Q's. That takes away from their privilege of being able to say whatever they want to say to whomever they want to say it, whenever they want to say it.
Doesn't take away much of their privilege.
No.
That's sarcasm.
I think it's a sarcastic subject, and it's a cynical subject.
Well, but I honestly believe that there should be no surprise to this at all. And I honestly, again, and I know I'm being redundant, I cannot understand.
The shock.
That's right. Because I know that white people know what they talk about in private. I know that. Come on. I have white friends who tell me what is talked about. I mean, give me a break, will you?
Yeah.
So I know what kinds of things are said, and everybody laughs about it, and so forth and so on.
And they all said.
And there's no problem.
In fact, there was a movie made in 1948, and I know you saw it. It was Gregory Peck. It was called The Gentleman's Agreement.
Of course, about the Jewish thing.
Right.
Of course.
And there's a particularly poignant scene.
Anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Where
Semitism.
John Garfield is talking to the woman
Anti-Semitism.
that he's in love with, and she's telling a story about, because he can't live in this neighborhood was restricted, because they were in
Right.
those restricted neighborhoods where Jews couldn't live in. Because see, this racism thing in America is widespread, and some people want to forget their history. But anyway, she said, you know I'm not like that, and I'm
Right.
not anti-Semitic.
Right.
Because the other night I was at a party, and this man was telling the most awful stories and jokes, and I just sat there mortified. And John Garfield looked at her dead in the eye, who happened to be also Jewish in real life, and ended up on the blacklist. So this wasn't just acting for him. What did you do?
Yeah, what did you do?
What did you say?
Yeah,
She said, I just sat there.
Right, I was mortified.
I was mortified.
I was mortified.
And he said, that ain't what he wants out of you.
Yeah.
You're skin and bones, and there's a heart there. You need to fight back. The only way. And see, this is what I am saying to America. We need to fight back. We can't afford to let this stuff go unsaid and undone. Trent Lott happened to say out in the open what a lot of people say in those private dinner parties, at those little picnics that people go to. And, you know, and don't tell me about Michael Jordan or Oprah Winfrey or Bill Cosby, because you tell the same stories. And by the way, I bring up Bill Cosby because his son was murdered by a Ukrainian immigrant who felt that it was okay that he murdered this young black man in the hills of Beverly Hills, just that he murdered the wrong young black man. Yeah. And how he got caught was after living in this country 2.5 years. Remember this, Larry?
Yes, I do. Very well.
And Camille Cosby wrote about this.
Right, I know.
That racism killed her son.
Right.
Because he got caught by bragging about how he had just killed a nigger
That's right.
the night before.
Right, and that should be okay.
And that was okay
That's
in his
right.
mind.
That's right.
And so, Trent Lott, I'll tell you something, and you know, I'm not sure I want Trent Lott replaced.
Well, see, that's what I wanted to say about a half hour ago.
You know why?
Because
I don't have to deal with no codes when I'm
Yeah,
dealing with
right.
Trent.
Yeah, right.
Jesse Helms, you know, in fact, I want Jesse Helms to stay, because now we got a real problem. Elizabeth Dole going to be trickier than Trick. I mean, you know, and I want Strom Thurmond and
It's
Trent
nice
Lott
to know where they're coming
because
from.
I know where they're coming from. I don't have to figure out nothing, you know, and I'm tired of sitting in front of white faces.
You know, that's funny. I talked to, this was before the new South Africa.
Right.
Okay, it was back in the,
Right.
in the rough days. And I talked to a black South African, and he said, I'll tell you something. I'll tell
5
you
minutes.
something. He said, it is more comfortable for me to be in South Africa than it would be to be in the United States.
Oh,
He said,
absolutely.
because when you wake up in the morning, you know who the enemy is.
Right.
You don't have to guess. You don't have to sort of watch your back to see what's going to happen because somebody's patting you on the back, okay? You know exactly what you have to face that day, who you can trust, who you can't trust. He said, if I lived in America, I would never know this. And he's right. He's absolutely correct. And it's what you're saying. It's nice to know where the person is coming from.
Trent Lott told the truth about how he felt. In fact, Trent Lott's probably being punished by white folks for being truthful, and by black America because of the fact, and I understand black America's outrage because it just brings those days. I mean, the words went through me like a knife
That's right.
when I heard them.
That's right.
Because you and I grew up under that terror. And people don't understand that. We grow up in terror-filled times. It was about terror.
That's why the burning of the cross is so horrendous.
That's right.
It's more than just words. It's more than just a freedom of speech issue. It's more than that. Every black person in this country has to be afraid when one cross gets burned
You mean
someplace.
when a white person burns a cross on their lawn, it don't bother you? Please.
Every person.
And
You
that's
see-
what it's...
You see, it's one thing to hate an individual for whatever reasons. I
Right.
mean, it's one thing to be angry at an individual and to try to get at them. But when you burn a cross, you're showing your disdain for every black person
And you're saying...
that ever existed.
And you're
saying
saying
you're not safe.
You're not safe.
You're not safe. And so that's a very
We're
interesting...
down to our last minute. Well, I want you to sum it up.
I think you're a better summer-upper than I am because I'll get carried away. You know me. I'm too emotional.
Well, I think that it's an emotional subject. And
I
on
know.
that note, you know, once again, but
No. What?
we need to think about the messenger and why the message has been so repugnant to both white and black America. But is it really repugnant? Or was it a truth that we don't dare face as a nation, as a society, and we still haven't faced? Unfortunately, Trent Lott brought all that to the forefront. Thank you very much. Please write your comments to Channel 15.
Thank you.